Warren Buffett has spent 7 decades beating Wall Street, and as far as anyone can tell, he has never finished a glass of scotch in his life. The man drinks cherry Coke with his McDonald's breakfast, but point his 10 most famous investing rules at the whiskey shelf and something strange happens. Trophy bottles in velvet boxes start behaving like meme stocks, and a few humble bottles hiding on the bottom shelf start looking like the buy of the decade. So today, we are counting down 10 of his rules applied to real bottles at real prices. And before we begin, make one prediction. You already know Buffett's most famous rule, the one about never losing money. Lock that guess in now because the rule is on this list, but it is nowhere near the top. The rule that took number 1 fits in a single sentence, was borrowed from Buffett's own teacher, and explains why a $40 bottle keeps embarrassing its $200 big brother. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about the modern whiskey world. It is a market now, whether we like it or not. Allocation lists, secondary flippers, auction records, influencer hype cycles, the same forces that inflate a stock bubble are working the spirits aisle every single day. And when a market behaves like a market, the calm discipline of a 95-year-old man from Omaha, Nebraska, turns out to beat the hype merchants every single time. He never wrote a word about single malt, yet his shareholder letters read like a survival manual for anyone standing in a liquor store, wondering why a box suddenly costs $300. Grab a glass, because some of these are going to sting. Number 10. Stay inside your circle of competence. In his 1996 letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, Buffett wrote that you do not have to be an expert on every company. You only have to be able to evaluate the ones inside your circle of competence. The size of that circle does not matter much. Knowing where its edges are matters enormously. He skipped the entire dot-com boom because he could not tell you what those companies actually did, and he was mocked for it right up until the crash proved him right. Now, apply that to whiskey. The fastest way to waste money in this hobby is to buy a $400 Japanese single malt because a stranger on the internet ranked it highly, when you could not yet describe the difference between a sherry cask and a bourbon cask if your dram depended on it. Build the circle first. A 12-year-old Glenfiddich, one of the 2 best-selling single malts on the planet, costs around $45 and teaches you exactly what pear and orchard fruit tastes like in a Speyside malt. It is the whiskey equivalent of the simple businesses Buffett loves, easy to understand, easy to judge, and available everywhere. Put it next to a smoky bottling one week and a sherried one the next. And within a couple of months, you will know your own palate the way Buffett knows an insurance balance sheet. Miniatures, tasting flights at a decent whiskey bar, sample swaps with friends, all of these widen the circle for pocket change, the same way Buffett spends his days reading annual reports instead of buying on rumors. The hype bottle you cannot evaluate is your version of the dot-com stock he refused to touch. It might be wonderful. You have no way of knowing, and that is the whole problem. Expensive bottles reward people who can actually taste what they paid for. Until then, the boundary of your circle is the price ceiling on your shopping basket. But knowing your own territory is only half the job, because the next rule is about judging the territory of the distillery itself. Number 9. Look for the moat. Buffett has said for decades that he wants businesses protected by a moat, a structural advantage a competitor cannot copy no matter how much money they throw at it. In his 2007 shareholder letter, he called it an enduring moat, the thing that makes a franchise last a century. Whisky has moats too, and the widest one in Scotland surrounds a faded little fishing town called Campbelltown. In the Victorian era, that town ran more than 30 distilleries and called itself the whisky capital of the world, shipping barrels out of its harbour to every corner of the empire. Then came collapse, closures, and decades of decline, and today just 3 established distilleries are left standing. The most famous of them is Springbank, run in connection with the same family line since 1828. They malt their own barley on a traditional malting floor, they distill, mature, and bottle everything on site. And from that one small stone building, they produce 3 different styles: the lightly smoky Springbank itself, the heavily peated Longrow, and the triple distilled Hazelburn. Their production capacity is tiny by industry standards, and they have refused every opportunity to industrialize it. Nobody can build a second Victorian Campbelltown. A billionaire could copy the equipment tomorrow and still be a century and a half short of the history. That scarcity is structural, baked into geography and history, which is precisely why demand for the 10-year-old Springbank now runs miles ahead of supply. When you find it near its intended retail price, somewhere around $80 rather than the inflated figures flippers ask, you are buying an asset with a genuine moat at a sane price. Compare that with a shiny new distillery whose entire advantage is a marketing budget. Moats are dug over centuries. Advertising campaigns are dug over a quarter. The trick is telling one from the other before you pay. And that leads straight into the rule Buffett once called the most important lesson of his career. Number 8. A wonderful company at a fair price. In his 1989 shareholder letter, Buffett admitted his early mistake of hunting cheap, mediocre businesses, and wrote that it is far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. Charlie Munger drilled that into him, and it turned Berkshire from a cigar butt collector into an empire. The Whisky Isle has its own wonderful company trading at a fair price, and it sits in Speyside behind a modest label called Glenfarclas. The Grant family has owned that distillery outright since 1865, 6 generations of them, running direct-fired stills heated by real flame and filling proper sherry casks from Spain while refusing to sell out to any conglomerate. The big drinks corporations have come knocking for decades, and the answer from the farmhouse has always been no. Because no outside shareholders demand luxury margins, the pricing stays almost defiantly old-fashioned, and the warehouses beside the distillery still sleep on decades of maturing stock that any accountant would have sold off years ago. The 12-year-old sells for around $60. Their 25-year-old, a quarter century of sherry cask maturation, can still be found for roughly $250, while other famous names ask well over $1,000 for the same age statement. Nothing about the liquid is compromised. The label is just allergic to hype. That is a wonderful company at a fair price, and buying it feels exactly the way Buffett describes his best decisions: boring at the checkout and brilliant 10 years later. However, owning something wonderful only pays off if you follow the next rule about what to do after you buy it. Number 7. The favorite holding period is forever. In his 1988 letter, after spending nearly $600 million on Coca-Cola stock, Buffett wrote that when Berkshire owns pieces of outstanding businesses, the favorite holding period is forever. He was telling the world he had no exit strategy because the point of owning a great thing is the owning, not the selling. Whisky collectors have drifted a long way from that idea. Cupboards across the country are stacked with sealed bottles bought purely to flip, tradable tokens that happen to contain drinkable history. Here is the Buffett translation. Buy bottles you intend to hold forever, which in whiskey terms means bottles you will actually open, because the dividend this asset pays is the liquid itself. A 16-year-old Lagavulin, the dark, smoky classic matured beside the sea, on a windswept island off Scotland's west coast, costs around $100, and unlike a stock, it stops improving the moment it goes into glass. Whisky does not age in the bottle. That sealed treasure is not compounding, it is just waiting. And the only way to collect the return is to pull the cork on a cold evening and pour it for people you like. There is a version of this mistake hiding in almost every whiskey cabinet. The special bottle saved for an occasion so special it never quite arrives, until one day the collection outlives the collector's enthusiasm. Buffett bought Coca-Cola in 1988, and Berkshire holds those shares to this day, collecting the dividend year after year. Your dividend is a Tuesday night dram that costs you nothing but the decision to enjoy what you already own. The investor who never sells and the whiskey lover who actually drinks are following the same philosophy. Own the wonderful thing completely, which brings us to the crowds who do the exact opposite, and the rule Buffett wrote for them. Number 6, be fearful when others are greedy. In his 1986 shareholder letter, Buffett wrote that Berkshire simply attempts to be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy only when others are fearful. It might be the single most quoted sentence he has ever produced, and nowhere outside the stock exchange does it apply more perfectly than the American bourbon craze. Look at Blanton's, the single-barrel bourbon in the round, grenade-shaped bottle with the little horse on the stopper. It was designed to sell for around $65. Hype videos, empty shelves, and allocation lists have pushed store prices past $150 in plenty of places, with secondary sellers asking even more for a bourbon that respected blind tastings routinely placed alongside bottles costing a third as much. Lines form outside liquor stores on delivery day, and the same fever burns hotter further up the shelf, where bottles of Pappy Van Winkle change hands for thousands of dollars against a list price in the low hundreds. That is greed you can photograph, and Buffett would tell you to feel fear, keep your wallet closed, and walk straight past. Remember that he wrote his famous Buy American essay in October 2008, while the financial world was on fire and everyone else was selling in a panic. He waits for fear, then acts. Then comes the profitable half of the sentence. Be greedy where others are fearful. Nobody queues for well-aged blended Scotch, unfashionable Irish bottlings, or dusty, unpeated malts, which is exactly why their prices still make sense. 10 years ago, bourbon itself was the unloved category, and the drinkers who quietly stocked up back then and are sitting on shelves the rest of us can only envy. Categories rotate in and out of fashion like sectors of the stock market, and the patient buyer simply moves toward whatever the crowd just abandoned. The hype crowd hunts trophies. The Buffett crowd hunts neglect. Buy what the room ignores, and you will drink better than the people fighting over the horse stopper. We are halfway down the list, and the 5 rules still to come include the cheapest great bottle in this entire video and the scam that has cost whiskey fans their life savings. Before we get there, if this way of thinking about whiskey is useful to you, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments which bottle you think is the smartest buy on shelves right now. I go through the comments after every upload, and the pics you leave down there shape the bottles I cover next. And keep hold of the guess you made at the start, because the answer is only 5 rules away. Now, onto the rule Buffett's own teacher called the heart of investing. Number 5. Insist on a margin of safety. Buffett learned this one from his mentor Benjamin Graham, and he has repeated it ever since, calling margin of safety the 3 most important words in investing. The idea is beautifully simple. Buy in a way that leaves room to be wrong, so even your mistakes treat you gently. In whiskey, the closest thing to a margin of safety is proof per dollar. Consider Wild Turkey Rare Breed, a barrel-proof Kentucky bourbon bottled at just under 60% alcohol, sitting on regular shelves for around $55. Compare that with a fashionable bottle at the legal minimum of 40% for a similar price. The Rare Breed simply contains far more actual whiskey, and you control it. Pour it neat when you want intensity. Add water and it becomes 2 or 3 different drinks at your own kitchen table. Run the arithmetic, and a single cask strength bottle holds close to half again as much pure spirit as its watered down neighbour, which means the distillery diluted nothing and charged you for everything that came out of the barrel. Scotland plays the same game with Glenfarclas 105, a sherried cask strength malt at 60% that costs less than many 40% bottles with prettier boxes. Undiluted strength is honesty in liquid form, a buffer against overpaying built right into the bottle. When the price is modest and the strength is high, being wrong barely costs you anything. And protecting the downside is the entire subject of the most famous rule Buffett ever gave. Number 4. Never lose money. Buffett's most repeated maxim says rule number 1 is never lose money, and rule number 2 is never forget rule number 1. He does not mean returns never dip. He means never put capital into something where permanent, unrecoverable loss is a real outcome. Whisky has a corner of the market purpose built for permanent loss, and it is the cask investment pitch. Slick websites and cold callers promise guaranteed returns on barrels of maturing scotch sleeping in bonded warehouses. British journalists and a BBC investigation have exposed schemes where victims lost millions between them, some their entire life savings, paying wildly inflated prices for casks that were overvalued, resold to multiple buyers, or in the worst cases, never existed at all. The warning signs repeat in every case. Cold calls from salesmen you never contacted, promised annual returns that beat the stock market, glossy brochures instead of independent valuations, and always a barrel sleeping somewhere you will never visit. When a stranger guarantees you profit on something you cannot see, the only guaranteed number in the conversation is his commission. The Buffett-proof way to never lose money on whiskey is almost embarrassingly simple. Buy sealed bottles at retail that you would be happy to drink. A 12-year-old Redbreast, the rich single-pot still Irish whiskey full of Christmas cake and orchard fruit, costs around $70, and its absolute worst-case scenario is that you drink one of the great whiskies of the world. No warehouse fees, no exit strategy, no broker, just a cork and a glass. When your downside is delicious, rule number 1 takes care of itself. The next rule explains why so many buyers ignore all of this, and it comes from inside Buffett's own head. Number 3. Score yourself on the inner scorecard. In Alice Schroeder's biography, The Snowball, Buffett describes the divide that shaped his whole life. Some people live by an outer scorecard, hungry for the crowd's applause, and some live by an inner scorecard, judging themselves by their own standards. He asks whether you would rather be the world's greatest lover while everyone believes you are the worst, or the world's worst lover while everyone believes you are the greatest. Whiskey shelves are an outer scorecard playground. Heavy bottles, famous names and gift boxes exist to impress the room. The inner scorecard drinker asks one question only: what does the liquid taste like? Answer that honestly, and the supermarket sleepers reveal themselves. Evan Williams' Bottled in Bond, the white label bourbon from Heaven Hill, costs around $20, and under the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, it must be aged at least 4 years, bottled at 100 proof, and made in a single season at a single distillery. It is government-guaranteed honesty in a plain package, and it embarrasses bottles at triple the price in blind tastings. Scotland has its own quiet performers sitting in the same shadow, well-made blends, and entry-level malts that never appear in a single hype video, precisely because there is no scarcity story to tell about them. Nobody at a dinner party will gasp when you pour any of them. Your inner scorecard will be quietly delighted. Drink for the scorecard only you can see, and the whiskey world quietly gets cheaper and better at the same time, which sets up the discipline rule that Buffett saved for students. Number 2. The 20-slot punch card. Buffett has told business school audiences that he could improve anyone's financial life with a simple card. Imagine a punch card with just 20 slots, representing every investment you get to make in an entire lifetime. Once you punch all 20, you are done forever. With rules like that, he says, you would think enormously hard before acting, and you would only swing at the fattest pitches. Now look at the average whiskey cabinet, crowded with impulse buys from late-night scrolling, limited editions bought out of pure fear of missing out, and half-remembered airport purchases. Run the punch card experiment on your own buying. Give yourself 20 bottle purchases for the whole year, and suddenly every trip to the shop becomes a real decision. You start reading reviews before you buy instead of after, tasting a friend's pour before committing to a full bottle, letting a release you feel lukewarm about pass without a flicker of regret. The scattergun bottles fall away, and what survives is the considered swing, something like a 15-year-old Glendronach, a dark Highland malt matured in sherry casks layered with fig, walnut, and old leather for around $100. One deliberate bottle like that delivers more pleasure than 5 panic buys, and your shelf slowly turns into a portfolio Buffett would recognize: small, concentrated, and chosen with care. Fewer, better, slower. That is the whole discipline, and it leaves only the rule that towers over every other idea in this video. Number 1. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. If your guess at the start was never lose money, you now see why it stopped at number 4. This rule is bigger because it quietly contains all the others. Buffett put the line in his 2008 letter to shareholders in the middle of a financial crisis, crediting it to the teacher who shaped him, Ben Graham, and it is the entire philosophy in 10 words. Price is a number on a tag. Value is what actually ends up in your hands, and the whiskey industry survives on the gap between the two. The cleanest demonstration on any shelf is Johnnie Walker. Blue Label arrives in a beautiful presentation box at around $200, carrying no age statement at all. Black Label, from the same blending house, is a 12-year-old blend that costs around $40 and has been one of the most consistently excellent whiskies on earth for a century. In blind tastings, with the boxes and the price tags hidden, the gap between them shrinks to almost nothing, and plenty of tasters walk away preferring the cheaper glass. Your tongue receives liquid. It cannot taste the presentation box, the heavy stopper, or the celebrity endorsement, which means the extra money buys cardboard, glassware, and a story to tell your guests. Sometimes that story is worth it to you, and that is a fair trade as long as you know what you are actually purchasing. That is price without value, the brand tax in its purest form, and once you learn to see it, you cannot unsee it anywhere in the store. So if you take one habit from Omaha into the whiskey aisle, make it that final question, asked every single time, what am I paying and what am I actually getting? The man made more than $100 billion and still lives in the same Omaha house he bought in 1958 for $31,500 because the value never stopped being there. Every rule on this list, the moats, the margin of safety, the punch card, the inner scorecard, is really just that one question wearing a different coat. The whiskey shelf will keep inventing new ways to separate you from your money. Do that with every bottle, and the hype machine simply stops working on you, while your glass, strangely enough, keeps getting better. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing, and we will see you in the next one.